CEO goes undercover and catches his manager stealing. His revenge will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, tell us, have you ever had a terrible boss? Drop your worst work story in the comments. And if you love shocking workplace stories, make sure to subscribe so you never miss out. Nathan Cole took a deep breath as he stood in a cramped stockroom that smelled of stale coffee and cardboard boxes. This wasn't how most CEOs spent their evening, but then again, most CEOs didn't go undercover at their own company. He glanced at the time on his phone, noticing it was nearly midnight, and the store's closing protocols clearly weren't being followed. Right away, his stomach tightened with that distinct sensation that something was very wrong. In the corner, a group of employees whispered in hushed voices, their laughter carrying an edge of nervousness. The store was still technically open, though customers had dwindled to a few stragglers. But no one seemed to care. Registers lay half unattended. Product displays were in disarray. Workers clocked out and left without even a nod to the skeleton crew who remained. It was chaos, and it immediately set Nathan's heart pounding. He wasn't here to judge his employees' every move. On the contrary, he wanted to see how they operated when they thought no one was watching. However, what he witnessed in the first 5 minutes made his blood boil. Even more unsettling was the fact that the store's manager, a man named Blake, was nowhere to be seen. That was the first red flag that hit him like a punch to the gut. If a manager was absent when the store was in shambles, what did it say about his leadership or lack thereof? One of the employees, a cashier who looked barely out of high school, noticed Nathan standing aimlessly. She gave him a fleeting glance, then turned back to her register with a resigned sigh. It struck him that nobody was greeting him, asking if he was lost, or even noticing that a stranger was standing right there. Nathan had chosen a simple disguise, a cheap work polo, worn jeans, and the store's standard name badge with his alias. Nate, trainee. The plan was to blend in as a new hire, learning the ropes under Blake's tutelage. The differences between a seasoned CEO and a newbie on the first day were striking. Nathan felt that pang of vulnerability he hadn't experienced in years. He had to remind himself not to automatically take the reins. If he did, it would blow his cover before he even started. He cleared his throat and approached the cashier, Lisa, to get some sense of direction. Her eyes flicked over him again, a subtle trace of pity crossing her face. "You're new here?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Yeah, I just got hired. Someone was supposed to show me where to start." Lisa glanced around, looking for any sign of authority. "Blake's in the back, probably. Good luck. He usually doesn't want people knocking on his door." She waved vaguely toward the rear hallway, and Nathan felt a surge of irritation at how casually this was tossed off. A manager who hid in his office while his store sank into disorder? That didn't sit right with him. Nathan decided to explore the aisles first, just to see how bad it really was. Merchandise was strewn about. Clearance items that should have been neatly displayed were piled in a haphazard heap. Boxes of unopened stock lined the center aisle, making it difficult for the few remaining customers to navigate. He heard frustrated whispers, people complaining about the lack of help. This was a direct reflection on leadership, and if the manager wasn't on the floor, then there was a serious problem. His pulse quickened again. He knew from corporate reports that sales at this location had been slipping for months. The data suggested staffing or organizational problems, but the reality was more dire than he'd imagined. He noticed a second, more ominous problem as well. The register drawers weren't properly locked. They were slightly ajar, as if someone had rifled through them. A cursory look showed random stacks of bills stuffed in disarray, receipts strewn around. Anyone could have walked up and grabbed cash. That was a huge liability. Nathan finally decided he needed to locate Blake. The door to the back office was slightly cracked. He heard muffled laughter. As he inched closer, he caught a glimpse through the gap. Blake, leaning back in a chair, his feet propped up on the desk, counting out a wad of bills. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest. Was this the money from the register? It had to be. The man seemed too casual, too comfortable, as if this was a common routine. Nathan couldn't believe the blatant disregard for basic procedure. Suddenly, another employee entered the office, but Blake didn't even try to hide the cash. If anything, he flashed a grin and stashed it in a drawer. It confirmed Nathan's worst suspicions. He stepped back, unwilling to blow his cover yet. He felt a surge of anger at the disrespect for the business he had worked so hard to build. But a confrontation now would be premature. He wanted solid evidence, something irrefutable. Walking away, he decided to find a more inconspicuous vantage point. He propped himself near the cleaning supplies corridor, heart thumping, adrenaline coursing. Sure enough, Blake emerged a few minutes later, that smug grin still on his face. And when he saw Nathan lingering there, his expression darkened. "You the new guy?" Blake asked in a low growl. Nathan nodded, forcing a polite smile. Blake's gaze flicked to the cheap name badge. "Well, keep your head down, do what you're told, and don't ask questions you don't need to ask." Then he walked off, leaving Nathan with a growing sense of unease. This was worse than he imagined. It wasn't just laziness or mismanagement. Something told him Blake was crossing the line into criminal territory. And if that was true, Nathan would have to collect undeniable proof before he could blow the whistle. He wouldn't just fire him, he wanted the authorities involved. But first, he needed to see exactly how deep this route went. And by the look of things, it went pretty deep indeed. Nathan tried to stay calm as he returned to the front of the store, but his mind raced with possibilities. Could Blake really be stealing on such a grand scale? And if he was, why was everyone else so silent about it? The second red flag smacked him in the face when he saw how employees jumped at Blake's every order the moment he emerged from the back office. They stood straighter, lowered their voices, and darted worried glances in his direction. This wasn't the normal fear of a stern manager. It was something deeper, like a collective anxiety that rotted the atmosphere. He took a spot behind an abandoned checkout lane, pretending to familiarize himself with the register. Nobody had bothered to train him, so he fiddled with the buttons and scanned random items. He watched Lisa handle a line of frustrated customers on her own. The tension in her shoulders betrayed an ongoing sense of dread, like she was dreading some kind of fallout if she messed up. Blake hovered nearby, arms crossed, occasionally barking orders that made little sense. He told one employee to start cleaning shelves in the far corner while ignoring the growing line of customers. He demanded Lisa put more cash in the register tray without explaining where it should come from. At one point, Lisa tried to interrupt. "Blake, I need change. We're running low, and there's a line here." He shot her a glare that could melt steel. "Figure it out. That's what you're paid for," he snapped. Lisa's expression wavered between exhaustion and silent rage. Nathan felt a pang of empathy. This was the exact culture he'd hoped to uproot when he founded the company. It made him sick to watch it happen right under his nose. When Blake wasn't watching, Lisa quietly told Nathan, "Be careful. He doesn't want us speaking to each other much. Something about it wasting time." Nathan just nodded, playing the part of a timid newbie. But inside, he was boiling. He felt like stepping in and admonishing Blake on the spot. The only thing stopping him was the knowledge that any premature outburst might give Blake time to destroy evidence or cover his tracks. Nathan was determined to see how the manager operated when he believed no one was holding him accountable. He noticed the atmosphere of fear extended beyond Lisa. A stock boy, maybe 17, approached Blake about needing a bathroom break. Blake belittled him for not holding it. The look in the boy's eyes was pure humiliation. Nathan thought of all the times he'd emphasized dignity and respect in corporate memos, how he made it a point that employees should be treated fairly. Now he watched the direct opposite unfold. His stomach churned. The store was run on intimidation. If Blake was stealing, maybe he also bullied his staff to keep them quiet, forcing them to look the other way. Nathan turned back to his register, pretending to test buttons. A cold voice hissed near his ear. "Don't touch anything if you don't know what you're doing." He almost jumped. It was Blake, creeping up behind him with a suspicious glare. "Why are you on the register, newbie?" Blake demanded. You haven't even been trained. Nathan stammered out some excuse about wanting to learn. Blake's lip curled. That's not your call to make. You do what I say, when I say it. And right now, I say go help restock the dairy section. Last guy who tried to play hero around here ended up looking for a new job. That sentence hung in the air like a threat. Nathan forced a nod and backed away. He was acutely aware that he'd become a target the moment he asked too many questions, or exhibited too much curiosity about the store's finances. He also knew that eventually, he'd confront Blake about what he saw. But not yet. He needed more evidence. As Nathan navigated to the dairy section, he noticed half the coolers were almost empty. Milk cartons were out of date, some of them curdled and still on the shelves. This pointed to gross negligence, maybe on purpose if Blake was trying to sabotage the store's performance to cover up missing funds. A creeping sense of dread settled over him. If the store's performance tanked enough, corporate might consider shutting it down, which would conveniently wipe out any trace of the theft. That could be part of Blake's strategy: run the place into the ground, pocket money, then vanish before anyone noticed. The young stock boy appeared, carrying a case of milk. He hesitated, gave a nervous glance around, then looked at Nathan. You're new, right? His voice trembled. Just be careful, man. If you ask too many questions, Blake will make your life miserable. He's done it to all of us. Nathan asked carefully. Why does everyone stay then? The boy shrugged. Around here, jobs aren't easy to come by. A lot of us are stuck. And Blake knows it. Nathan's jaw tensed. He was reminded of why he started this company in the first place: to create jobs and uplift communities. Here was a store manager using desperation and limited options as leverage to treat employees like garbage. He felt an overwhelming urge to blow his cover on the spot and fix it. But he forced himself to remain composed, to observe carefully, to learn how deep the problem ran. He watched the boy stack milk cartons, all the while looking over his shoulder. It was like he expected Blake to appear and berate him for taking too long. Nathan offered to help, but the kid shook his head. I appreciate it, he whispered. But if Blake sees you doing my job, he'll think I'm slacking. Then he'll find some excuse to dock my hours. Nathan swallowed hard. Docking hours? It sounded like petty cruelty. Another piece of the puzzle. Perhaps Blake systematically reduced hours, claiming employees underperformed, so it would appear as though the store had bigger labor problems. Meanwhile, that might allow him to redirect payroll funds into his own pocket. It all led to the same conclusion: Blake's corruption ran deep. Nathan moved on, stifling his anger. He needed to record more details. As he meandered toward the employee break room, he noticed a giant notice board plastered with old schedules. Something was off. The time clock reports didn't match the number of hours that employees claimed to have worked. It was sloppy. Another sign that money was being siphoned or wages were being manipulated. There was a sense of conspiracy in the air, but no one seemed willing to speak up. He took out his phone, pretending to check messages, but really snapping covert photos of those schedules. He hoped these pictures would serve as evidence. One employee, whose name tag read Jenny, noticed him. She looked around nervously and hissed. Put that away before Blake sees. He'll accuse you of taking pictures to rat him out. Then he'll make your life hell. Nathan nodded, feigning ignorance. I was just checking the time. Jenny gave him a sorrowful look. I hope for your sake that's all you were doing. We've had people try to complain to corporate before. Didn't end well. Nathan wondered how Blake managed to keep corporate off his back. Did he threaten employees into retracting their complaints? Maybe he had a friend up the chain. Either way, the chilling effect was real. These people were terrified into silence. Tucking his phone away, Nathan steeled himself for what might come next. He had to find a way to get tangible, indisputable proof that Blake was embezzling cash from the store. Then, he'd have to catch him red-handed. But the biggest question still loomed: how much damage had already been done, and how many livelihoods had been impacted by this scheme? Nathan positioned himself near the edge of the break room, quietly sipping on a bottle of water he'd retrieved from an ancient vending machine. He took the moment to gather his thoughts, still posing as the timid new hire. A glance at the clock told him it was now well past midnight, and the store was technically closed. But that didn't stop Blake from strutting around, counting money in plain sight. Customers had left, and only a handful of employees remained, finishing their tasks or nervously hovering at their stations like they weren't sure they were allowed to go. He could sense the tension mounting. A single overhead light buzzed in the break room, giving the scene a grim, flickering aura. Lisa came in, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She leaned against the wall, pressing a hand to her temple as though fighting a headache. Nathan tried to look sympathetic. He knew any direct questions might spook her, but he couldn't help feeling compelled to ask. "Are you okay?" he said softly, making sure no one else was in earshot. She glanced up, startled, and then forced a weak smile. "I'm fine," she lied, with the weary look of someone who'd repeated that line 1,000 times. He gave a gentle nod. "Look, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here," he offered, still mindful not to show too much of his hand. She let out a slow breath, eyes flickering to the break room door to ensure no one was listening. Then she whispered, "It's been a rough night. Actually, it's been a rough few months." She paused, eyes darting to the dingy linoleum floor. "Hours got cut, wages got messed with, and any time I ask about it, Blake accuses me of screwing up the register or not doing my job. Then he says I need to be grateful for what I have." Nathan's chest tightened. There it was, a clear example of financial manipulation. He tried to sound casual. "How many hours are you missing?" he asked. She hesitated. "I don't know exactly. Maybe 7 or 8 a week for the past few months. It adds up. I asked for a printout of my timesheets, but Blake always has an excuse. He says the system is down or something like that." Nathan suppressed a growl of anger. This was exactly the kind of unscrupulous behavior he suspected. If Blake was shaving hours off paychecks, that was theft, and it directly harmed employees like Lisa. Nathan carefully shifted the conversation. "Well, maybe it's just an error in the system," he said, testing her reaction. She gave him a sad, knowing look. "At first I thought that too," she replied. "But then it happened to other people, like Jenny or Mark. And whenever we ask too many questions, we suddenly lose more hours. It's a pattern. A terrifying one." He heard footsteps in the hallway and lowered his voice. This felt more like a secret investigation than a normal workplace interaction. He tried to offer a reassuring smile, but inside he raged at the injustice of it all. Lisa exhaled shakily, as if summoning the courage to speak more freely. "I have a kid," she said, voice trembling slightly. "I can't afford to lose hours, but I can't afford to lose this job either. I'm stuck." Nathan's resolve hardened. The heartbreak in her voice reminded him exactly why he founded the company in the first place. He knew he had to expose Blake and make it right, but the risk to these employees was enormous. If Blake caught wind of any whistleblowing, he'd retaliate. For Lisa's sake, and for all the others stuck in this oppressive environment, Nathan had to be strategic. He heard the break room door creak, and both he and Lisa tensed. The stock boy, looking even more drained than before, trudged in and collapsed on a folding chair. "Blake says we're all staying late," he mumbled. "Something about inventory." Lisa rolled her eyes, a bitter expression crossing her face. "Great. Inventory that's probably not even accurate," she said under her breath. Nathan watched their reactions carefully. The mention of an after-hours inventory check had a sinister ring. Perhaps Blake was using it as a cover to manipulate stock numbers, a perfect opportunity to hide his own thievery. He decided to take a cautious risk. "Has anyone tried reporting him? Like anonymously?" The stock boy snorted, rubbing his eyes. "Do you think he leaves us alone with the computer long enough for that? Plus, he probably has connections. We had a manager before him who got replaced under weird circumstances. Nobody knows the details, but it makes everyone nervous." Nathan felt a chill. Could Blake have connections higher up that ensured he could continue this behavior without consequence? He forced a casual shrug, staying within the limits of his undercover role. Well, guess we should try not to make waves. Lisa gave him a wary look, but said nothing. Nathan sensed that she was too drained to fight or trust easily at this point. He felt a pang of guilt for not stepping in openly, but he had to remind himself that doing so might only cause more harm if he couldn't present undeniable proof of Blake's wrongdoing. Outside in the hallway, Blake's voice rose, commanding employees to get ready for an inventory sweep. The store's lights flickered fully back on, revealing just how disorganized the place was. Nathan volunteered to help with the inventory, hoping he'd catch Blake in some incriminating act. But a nagging question gnawed at him: how far would Blake go to maintain control? Was he simply a bully and a thief, or was he capable of something more dangerous? As they left the break room, Nathan noticed the hush that fell over the staff. They lined up with scanning devices and clipboards, all waiting for Blake's instructions. The manager stood at the front like a dictator, scanning each face, daring anyone to defy him. "All right," Blake snarled. "Let's get this over with. We're gonna make sure every item is accounted for. If any of you slack off or put the wrong numbers, I'll know." His glare landed on Nathan. "New guy, you stick close. I don't trust you yet." Nathan nodded, feigning subservience, but inside, his thoughts boiled. "You're the one who shouldn't be trusted, Blake. Someday soon, you'll regret treating your employees like disposable pawns. And I'll be the one to make sure of it." With a handheld scanner in one hand and a clipboard in the other, Nathan followed Blake's orders to move through the aisles, item by item. It felt surreal to be auditing shelves in a store he technically owned, but the weight of his real purpose kept him grounded. He was here to witness, to gather proof, and eventually to hold Blake accountable. And as the inventory process dragged on, one glaring issue after another leaped out at him. Entire sections of merchandise were understocked, overpriced, or misplaced. There were strange discrepancies in brand counts. It was an absolute operational nightmare. Blake, meanwhile, wandered around like some self-styled emperor, occasionally yelling at someone for scanning too slowly or whispering too loudly. "Don't drag this out," he barked at Lisa, who was struggling with her scanner. When she tried to protest that the device kept freezing, Blake snapped. "Then figure it out. I don't pay you to complain." Nathan clenched his jaw, scanning a random box of cereal. The beep echoed in the silence. He fought the urge to retort, to tear Blake down verbally. But he held back. At one point, Blake swaggered up to Nathan. "You got a problem with my methods, newbie? You keep looking at me like you're about to say something." Nathan did his best to play it cool. "No, sir," he said in a subdued tone. "Just trying to learn." Blake eyed him suspiciously. "Learn faster, or I'll find someone else to do your job." He stomped away. Nathan suppressed a bitter laugh. The irony was that Blake genuinely thought he had the power to fire the CEO of the entire company. As the night wore on, the small injustices added up. Blake forced the stock boy to recount shelves he'd already done, claiming the counts were wrong. A middle-aged employee with a limp asked for permission to sit down for a moment. Blake refused, telling her to suck it up. Each encounter eroded the morale in the store, like acid wearing down metal. And Nathan couldn't help but notice that none of these employees even tried to stand up for themselves. They were too beaten down, too scared of retaliation. Eventually, Lisa reached a breaking point. She was scanning the refrigerated section when she ran out of labels. She approached Blake, carefully explaining the situation. He brushed her off without even looking up from the clipboard he was pretending to review. "Then go find more labels," he snapped. "If the storeroom is locked, figure it out. I'm not your babysitter." Lisa's eyes welled up with tears of frustration. Before Nathan could intervene, she hurried away. He watched her go, every instinct screaming at him to stand up to Blake. But he had to remind himself that he needed a slam-dunk case against this man. He noticed the cameras overhead and recalled how they seemed to be inactive. The little red light on each camera was off, indicating they weren't recording or had been turned off. The store's official policy required active camera surveillance whenever the store was open. Blake was blatantly violating that. It also meant Nathan might not get any footage from the store's system that could implicate Blake. He'd have to rely on his phone, written notes, or possibly the testimonies of employees who'd had enough. A customer unexpectedly wandered in through the main doors, which should have been locked at closing time. She looked around, bewildered that the store was in full inventory mode. Blake strode over, scowling. "We're closed," he snapped. "The door was open," the customer explained. Nathan realized that the doors hadn't been locked, another lapse in security. The manager glared at one of the employees, likely blaming them for the oversight, then basically shoved the customer out. It was a rude and reckless move that could lead to complaints, but Blake seemed not to care in the slightest. Then came the moment that finally propelled things to a new level of tension. Nathan was scanning a shelf of soup cans when he saw Blake, standing at a register, stuffing a stack of bills into his back pocket. He froze, heart pounding. This was it, the direct theft he'd been anticipating. Not just our theft from employees, but actual cash from the register. Nathan wasn't sure if anyone else noticed, but the store was quiet enough that the sound of the drawer opening clicked in his ears like a gun being cocked. He glanced around to see if any cameras might have captured that, but of course, they were all off. Nathan needed to do something. He pulled out his phone, casually lifting it as though checking a message. Out of the corner of his eye, he angled the camera to snap a quick photo. He hit the shutter a few times, hoping at least one image would show Blake's incriminating act. His pulse hammered. If Blake saw him, there'd be an immediate confrontation. But maybe that was what he wanted, some incontrovertible evidence. He quickly pocketed the phone, uncertain whether he'd gotten a clear shot. When he turned, he almost jumped out of his skin. Blake was right behind him, eyes narrow. "You on a break, rookie? Because I don't remember giving you permission to stand around." Nathan forced a laugh. "Just checking the stock list," he lied, waving the clipboard. Blake sniffed the air like a predator. Nathan's heart threatened to pound its way out of his chest. Would Blake suspect something? "Good," Blake finally said. "Then get back to it. We've got a lot of inventory to finish before we can call it a night." With that, he moved on, heading toward the back office. Nathan exhaled, muscles tense. He had a bad feeling. He'd been reckless taking that photo. But maybe it would be worth it if it was the proof he needed. He resumed scanning, though his hands shook slightly. A short while later, he overheard Blake making a phone call in hushed tones. Though Nathan couldn't catch all the words, the snippets were enough to raise more suspicion. "No, I'm not worried. They won't complain. I'll handle the rest tonight." Those cryptic sentences fueled his determination. He had to stay one step ahead. He mentally rehearsed his plan, gather enough evidence, then reveal his identity as CEO and call the authorities. But a cold, nagging thought kept gnawing at him. What if Blake had done this before and gotten away with it? What if he had an ally somewhere high up who would protect him? The risk was huge. But if Nathan didn't act, employees like Lisa would continue to suffer. He decided then that he would not leave the store tonight without confronting Blake in some capacity. The man was brazen, and brazen thieves eventually slip up. Nathan could feel it coming. The tension was like a live wire, crackling in the artificial light of the store's overhead bulbs. The question was not if the confrontation would happen, it was when. Lisa finally found the label she needed, but her eyes were swollen from crying. She tried to mask it as she walked past Nathan, but he could see the pain in her expression. He quietly offered, "I can help you label if you want." She gave him a small nod, and together, they moved through the dairy section again, scanning items and slapping on price labels. It was mundane, repetitive work, yet the tension in the air made every moment feel excruciatingly heavy. Lisa kept glancing at the store's entrance, as though expecting someone to burst in. Maybe she feared Blake's wrath, or perhaps she was hoping for a miracle that would save them from another hour of torment. Nathan tried to lighten the mood with small talk, but it was like trying to shine a flashlight in a vast, dark cave. The gloom persisted. Eventually, Lisa sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "I can't believe this is my life," she muttered softly. "Every day I come in hoping it'll be better, and every day it's worse." Nathan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. It won't always be like this, he said, choosing his words carefully to avoid tipping her off about his true identity. Blake can't run things like this forever. She let out a hollow laugh. That's what I told myself when he first started. Then he got worse. Then someone complained to corporate, and that person was suddenly laid off for performance issues. I don't know if Blake has friends upstairs or if he's just good at covering his tracks, but he always lands on his feet. Nathan's anger swelled, but he forced it down. He needed a plan, a surefire way to catch Blake red-handed. He noticed a detail in the corner of his eye. The office door had been left ajar. The warm glow of a desk lamp spilled out, and he could see a safe in the corner. The word was that managers had limited access to the safe for daily operations, but the way Blake seemed to use it suggested he treated it like his personal bank. If Nathan could find a moment to slip in there and film or photograph something incriminating, that might seal the deal. Lisa handed him a new stack of labels, and as he bent down to scan a lower shelf, he heard the distant echo of Blake's voice. He was yelling at someone in the front, complaining about incompetence and lazy workers. The tirade went on for a full minute, the words so loud that even the beep of the scanner couldn't drown them out. Lisa winced, looking over her shoulder. I should get back, she whispered. I don't want him coming after me next. Nathan nodded, letting her go. He kept an eye on the hallway leading to the back office. When he saw no one around, he took a calculated risk. He crept toward the office, heart pounding. The store's fluorescent lights seemed harsher than ever, and the hum of the cooling units roared in his ears like distant thunder. He paused at the threshold, listening carefully. He could still hear Blake yelling out front. Carefully, he slipped inside. The desk was scattered with spreadsheets, receipts, and a ledger that looked more like a personal notebook than an official record. On top of the desk, multiple stacks of cash were scattered, not even hidden. Nathan used his phone to take rapid-fire photos, capturing everything he saw. Loose bills, scribbled notes that might indicate manipulated transactions, references to hours shaved, and even a note about no cameras. The safe door itself was locked, but there were suspicious scratch marks around the lock, as if it had been frequently tampered with. He took pictures of that too. His heart hammered like a war drum. This was the goldmine of evidence he needed, but it also put him at extreme risk if Blake caught him in the act. Suddenly, he heard heavy footsteps approaching. Panicking, he looked around for a place to hide. The office was cramped, with barely enough room for a folding chair and a desk. He ducked behind a row of boxes stacked near the door, crouching down as low as he could. The office door swung open, and Blake stormed in, muttering curses under his breath. Nathan held his breath, praying that the manager wouldn't notice him. Through the gap between boxes, he could see Blake rummaging through the desk. A moment later, the man pulled open a drawer, counted some bills, and stuffed them into his pocket. Nathan dared not move. Every second felt like an hour. He could feel his thighs burning from crouching. Blake slammed the drawer shut, cursed something about ungrateful employees, then stomped out of the office. The door banged shut behind him. Nathan waited a tense minute before daring to stand. His pulse pounded against his temple. He'd come dangerously close to being caught. But he had crucial proof in his phone now. Stepping out into the hallway, he checked to make sure it was clear. Then he hurried off to resume scanning like nothing had happened. Inside, though, he seethed with a mix of relief and anger. Relief that he had gathered damning evidence, anger that the manager was so bold about his theft. He also felt a spark of determination. Tonight might be the night everything changed. He came around the corner to find Lisa, the stock boy, and a few others lined up for what looked like a group dressing down. Blake stood in front of them, arms folded. "We're never leaving at this rate," he snarled. "If you people can't keep up with a simple inventory, maybe you don't deserve this job." Nathan joined the line, heart still racing. He noticed how some employees looked at the floor, while others stared at Blake with barely concealed hatred. Everyone seemed too exhausted or scared to speak out. In that moment, the dynamic shifted subtly. Nathan could see it in their eyes. People were getting fed up, dangerously so. Tension soared, like the air was charged with electricity before a storm. Blake paced up and down, barking insults, threatening to dock hours or write people up. Nathan steadied his breathing. He knew a breaking point was imminent, and he would be there to push it over the edge if necessary. Enough was enough. The next time Blake singled out Lisa, Nathan felt a surge of adrenaline that made it impossible to remain passive. The manager accused her of padding hours, just because she returned from the stockroom 2 minutes later than he expected. She tried to defend herself, saying she had to lug a heavy box, but Blake was having none of it. "You think I'm stupid?" he snapped, jabbing a finger in her face. "You're on thin ice. One more screw-up and you're gone." Nathan knew he couldn't remain silent any longer. "Hey," he said, stepping forward, his voice quavering only slightly. "She was carrying a big box. I saw it." Blake's eyes narrowed, locking onto Nathan with a dangerous glint. "You got something to say, newbie?" he asked in a low voice that barely masked his fury. Nathan forced himself not to look away. "I just think it's unfair to accuse her without proof." The moment he said it, he braced for impact. Blake turned fully to Nathan, crossing his arms over his chest. The tension in the store was so thick it felt tangible. Lisa looked terrified, her eyes darting to Nathan like she was silently begging him to back down before something awful happened. But he stood his ground. "Unfair?" Blake repeated, voice mocking. "Who are you to talk about fair? You haven't even been here a week, and you're already telling me how to run my store?" Nathan swallowed hard, but he didn't back down. "Just seems like she's being singled out," he said, choosing his words carefully. "It's not right." Blake let out a short, humorless laugh. "You don't get to decide what's right or wrong here." "I do." His gaze flicked toward Lisa. "And as for you, you'd better watch yourself. I can replace you with a phone call." Nathan's heart pounded. He knew he was pushing his luck, but he couldn't stand by and watch Lisa be bullied anymore. She had tears brimming in her eyes, though her jaw was set in a mix of anger and desperation. The other employees stood around, silent witnesses, too afraid to intervene. The hush felt deafening. Blake turned back to Nathan. "You know what? Since you're so concerned about other people's work, you can take on extra duty. Go sweep the parking lot. Now." Nathan blinked, taken aback by the pettiness. The store was technically closed and they were doing inventory. Sweeping the parking lot made no sense. But he recognized the power play. Blake wanted to humiliate him in front of everyone. For a moment, Nathan considered revealing who he really was right then and there. But the heat of anger clouded his judgment. He remembered the evidence he'd gathered, the pictures on his phone. There was still a chance to do this systematically, to bring him down in a way that would stick. So he nodded slowly, biting back any retort. "Fine," he said. "I'll sweep the parking lot." A twisted grin spread across Blake's face. "Good. And take your time. I don't want to see your face in here for a while." Nathan turned away, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him. He glanced at Lisa, who looked torn between gratitude and fear. Then he trudged toward the exit, broom in hand, the frustration eating at him. The night air outside was cool, a sharp contrast to the heated tension inside the store. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few employee cars. As he swept under the flickering streetlights, he tried to calm himself. The manager had no clue who he was dealing with. Nathan was determined to show him just how wrong he was. Yet he also worried about the employees, especially Lisa. If he didn't handle this right, Blake could make her life even more miserable. A car pulled in abruptly, headlights glaring. Nathan paused, watching. The vehicle circled to a discreet corner of the parking lot, out of range of the big store windows. The engine idled. Nathan squinted, broom in hand. After a moment, Blake emerged from the store and walked over to the car. The shadows concealed them, but Nathan saw Blake leaning into the passenger window, having a hushed conversation with whoever was inside. The scenario raised all kinds of suspicions. Was Blake meeting a partner in crime? A buyer for the stolen goods? Or just a friend picking him up? Nathan glanced around. This part of the lot was dimly lit, the camera coverage presumably offline, just like the store's interior system. He inched closer, staying out of view behind a row of shopping carts. Through the gloom, he could make out some kind of handoff, a small box or envelope passing from the driver to Blake. Nathan's heart quickened. If he could get closer, maybe he could see more. But the risk was high. He didn't want to spook them and lose the chance for evidence. He crouched down, creeping from cart to cart, but it was hard to see what was being exchanged. Then the car door slammed. The driver sped off, tires squealing. Blake watched them go, stashing whatever he'd received inside his jacket. Nathan cursed under his breath. He had no solid proof of what just transpired. Still, it was a puzzle piece that made the bigger picture clearer. Blake had outside connections, possibly illegal ones. Maybe he was moving stolen merchandise, or doing some side dealing. In any case, it was more evidence that he was dirty to the core. Nathan gripped the broom handle, wrestling with the urge to confront him now. But no, not yet. He had to be patient, had to make sure when he finally confronted Blake, there'd be no escape and no denial. Eventually, Blake noticed Nathan in the parking lot. He strode over with that swagger that had become so familiar. "You done playing with your broom, hero?" he sneered. Nathan put on a neutral expression. "Just about." Blake threw a glance at the spot where the mysterious car had parked. "See anything interesting?" Nathan shrugged. "Nothing out of the ordinary." Blake narrowed his eyes, as if unsure whether Nathan was bluffing. But he said nothing more. Instead, he jerked his thumb toward the store. "Get back inside. We're finishing inventory. Then we're all clocking out. Got it?" Nathan nodded, turning toward the door. He could sense the hostility radiating off Blake. The manager might have suspected that Nathan was trouble, but he didn't yet realize just how big of a problem he actually was. As Nathan stepped inside, he took a last look at the empty parking lot, feeling the determination within him boil. Something was going to crack soon, and he was ready to play his part. Nathan re-entered the fluorescent-lit store, feeling the residual chill from his run-in with Blake linger on his skin. He could almost taste the tension in the air. Employees were still working dutifully, scanning and tallying inventory. Lisa was stacking boxes near the checkout lanes, looking drained to the point of collapse. The stock boy silently pushed a cart brimming with returned items. Each worker moved like a ghost, avoiding conversation lest they attract Blake's wrath. As Nathan grabbed his clipboard again, he felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. A subtle glance confirmed it was a text from a corporate contact he trusted, one he'd alerted earlier that night. The text read, "Any proof yet?" A surge of relief and determination coursed through him. He typed back with trembling fingers. "Yes, got photos. We'll confront soon." It was risky to communicate in front of everyone, but he needed to keep them in the loop. If things went south, corporate had to know exactly what was going on. He resumed scanning as though nothing had happened. Over at a nearby shelf, Jenny, another employee, tried to rearrange a stack of canned goods while rubbing her tired eyes. Blake caught sight of her. "Move faster!" he barked, causing her to nearly topple the entire stack. Nathan clenched his jaw but kept silent for the moment. He noticed Lisa shoot him a look that begged him not to intervene unless absolutely necessary. The fear in her eyes was palpable. Moments later, the store phone rang. Blake answered with a curt, "What?" Then, his expression shifted from irritated to furious. "What do you mean you're short tonight?" he hissed into the receiver. "You double count that drawer before you start accusing me." There was a pause while he listened. "Fine," he snapped at last. "I'll come take a look." He slammed the phone down, glaring around as if daring anyone to comment. Then he stormed off toward the customer service area, muttering curses under his breath. Nathan saw an opportunity. With Blake gone, he could quickly share a word with the exhausted employees. He sidled up to Lisa and lowered his voice to a near whisper. "Are you okay?" She shook her head. "This is what it's like every night," she whispered back. But we can't all just quit. We need these jobs. Nathan nodded, guilt churning in his gut for not revealing his identity sooner. But he had to see the big picture through. Maybe not for long, he whispered, giving her a significant look. She frowned, confused, but before he could elaborate, Blake's angry voice echoed from across the store. "Everybody get over here!" he shouted, summoning the staff with a tone that brooked no argument. Reluctantly, they all gathered near the customer service counter. Blake stood behind it, arms folded, eyes blazing. "We've got a short register," he announced coldly. "Which means one of you idiots is either incompetent or stealing." He glared around the circle of pale, exhausted faces. "Anyone want to confess?" No one spoke. Nathan's pulse quickened. He knew who was really doing the stealing, but he had to let Blake dig himself deeper. The manager smacked the counter with his palm, making some people jump. "Fine," he snarled. "We're going to figure this out the hard way. Lisa, you were on that register tonight, weren't you?" She swallowed hard, taking a small step back. Only for a little while. But I'd balanced it when I was done." Blake's sneer was cruel. "Balanced it, huh? Then why is the drawer short?" Nathan could almost feel the employees collectively hold their breath. Lisa's voice trembled. I don't know. Maybe another cashier used it after me." Blake scoffed. "Oh, so now you're blaming someone else. That's convenient." Nathan stepped forward. "We don't have to accuse people without proof," he said. "Check the transaction logs. That'll show who used the register." Blake's glare pinned Nathan in place. "So now you're the expert, huh? You show up out of nowhere, and suddenly you know how to run this store?" Nathan stared back, keeping his voice steady. "Just saying it's a logical step. The system logs each employee when they sign in on a register." Blake let out a barking laugh that lacked any trace of humor. Sure. Let's see how that system works when the cameras are off, the logs are messed up, and some wise-ass newbie thinks he's in charge." He turned his venom back on Lisa. "Until we figure out who took that money, I'm docking your hours." She gasped, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "But I didn't do anything wrong!" Blake held up a hand. "That's enough. If you keep whining, I'll do more than dock your hours. I'll fire you right now." The silence that followed was gut-wrenching. Nathan knew that if he didn't step in soon, Lisa would be the scapegoat for Blake's theft. But he also needed to ensure the confrontation was timed perfectly to have the maximum effect. To not only save Lisa but blow this entire operation wide open. Blake then turned to the rest of the group. "Back to work. Finish scanning everything. No one goes home until we sort this out." The employees dispersed like frightened animals, each returning to their tasks with heads hung low. Nathan lingered, watching Lisa try to blink back tears. He walked over, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "I'm sorry," he murmured, wishing he could comfort her more openly. She sniffled, struggling to regain composure. "It's not your fault," she whispered. He's just awful." Nathan nodded. "We'll figure this out," he said softly. He turned away, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had the proof. He could call corporate or the authorities right now. But something within him insisted that Blake needed to be confronted publicly, in front of the very employees he terrorized. They deserved to see the man exposed for who he really was. And Nathan wanted them to know they weren't powerless. In his pocket, he felt his phone buzz again, a sign that time was running short. Corporate was expecting an update. With every passing moment, the tension reached new heights. The employees deserved relief, and Lisa deserved vindication. Nathan squared his shoulders, suspecting that the final showdown with Blake was nearer than ever. He just had to wait for the right spark to ignite the powder keg. That spark came sooner than Nathan anticipated. As the clock edged closer to dawn, exhaustion gripped everyone. The aisles looked half-finished, the staff bleary-eyed. Blake, on the other hand, seemed jittery, like a man on the brink of something explosive. Nathan spotted him pacing back and forth near a display of electronics, his phone clutched in his hand. Every few minutes, Blake shot Lisa a murderous glare. Finally, the moment arrived. Lisa was reorganizing a display of small gadgets when Blake stormed over. "You still messing with that section?" he barked, voice echoing in the nearly empty store. Lisa looked over her shoulder, stifling a yawn. "I'm nearly done," she replied, her voice shaky. Blake snatched one of the gadgets from her hand and tossed it aside. "Not fast enough," he growled. "You really think I don't see you stalling?" Nathan, scanning nearby, tensed. This was it. He could feel the confrontation boiling. Lisa, to her credit, tried to remain calm. "I'm not stalling," she said in a measured tone. "I'm just making sure the labels are accurate." Blake stepped closer, invading her personal space. "I've had enough of your excuses," he snarled. "You want to see what happens when you push me too far?" Lisa backed away, fear flashing in her eyes. Before Nathan could intervene, Blake grabbed a stack of unlabeled items off the shelf and flung them to the floor in a fit of rage. Plastic cracked, small parts scattered. Lisa gasped, horror-struck. The noise brought everyone running, employees abandoning their posts to see what was happening. "Pick it up," Blake ordered Lisa, towering over the broken mess. She trembled, tears threatening to spill. "I." Blake reached out and grabbed her by the arm, pulling her toward the debris. "I said pick it up!" he roared. That was the final straw. Nathan felt his blood run cold. The abusive manager had crossed the line into outright physical intimidation. Without thinking twice, Nathan rushed forward. "Let her go," he commanded, voice ringing out more forcefully than ever before. Blake turned, eyes wild. "Stay out of this," he hissed, but Nathan refused to budge. Heart pounding, he stepped between Blake and Lisa. "I said let her go. Now." For a moment, Blake's eyes flickered with confusion, like he couldn't believe the new guy had the nerve to stand up to him. Then that confusion twisted into fury. He shoved Nathan, causing him to stumble back. "You want to be a hero, newbie? Fine. You're fired," Blake spat. The small crowd of employees watched, stunned. Lisa used the distraction to scramble away, clutching her bruised arm. Nathan steadied himself, rage and adrenaline flooding his system. It was time. He was done playing along. Slowly, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. Blake sneered. "What, you gonna call someone to complain?" Nathan drew out a sleek, embossed business card. "You just assaulted one of your employees," he said quietly, deliberately. "And I happen to be more than just a new hire." He handed the card to Blake, who stared at it, uncomprehending. Then realization hit like a thunderbolt. The color drained from Blake's face as he read the name, Nathan Cole's CO. The air in the store seemed to vanish. Employees exchanged shocked glances. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd. Lisa's eyes widened, tears still glistening on her cheeks. Blake took a step back, the card slipping from his fingers. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. Nathan didn't let him recover. "You've been stealing from the registers," he declared, voice echoing off the store walls. "I have photos. I have proof of your ledger, of you pocketing cash, and of you shaving employees' hours. You've bullied and harassed this entire staff for far too long." Blake glanced frantically around, searching for an escape route. The employees watched, eyes burning with equal parts disbelief and satisfaction. Blake tried to regain his composure. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, forcing a hollow laugh. "This is all some big misunderstanding." Nathan stepped closer, refusing to let him slip away. "No, it's not," he said, voice ice cold. "You threatened employees, you falsified timesheets, and you assaulted Lisa." He looked around at the stunned crowd. "I'm calling the police. And you're going to answer for every single thing you've done." Blake's bravado wavered. He glanced over at Lisa, who now stood behind several coworkers for protection. Then his gaze flicked back to Nathan. Desperation twisted his features. He lunged for the phone in Nathan's hand, trying to snatch it away. Nathan sidestepped, and another employee, a husky man named Marco, stepped in, blocking Blake's path. "No more," Marco growled, eyes flashing with anger. "You're done pushing us around." At that moment, the tension reached a fever pitch. Blake, cornered and frantic, shoved Marco. Lisa and Jenny both shrieked. Nathan dialed 911, voice trembling with adrenaline as he reported the assault in progress. Blake cursed, looking for a way out. He sprinted toward the exit, but found it blocked by the stock boy, who clung to the door handles, determined not to let him escape. Blake roared, pushing the kid aside and bolting into the parking lot. Nathan and a few others chased after him, hearts hammering. Dawn was breaking, casting a faint gray light across the lot. The early morning chill bit at their skin. Blake dashed between parked cars, tossing frantic glances over his shoulder. But just then, a squad car, already en route after Nathan's call, pulled in, lights flashing. Blake froze. It was over. One of the officers stepped out. "Stop right there!" he ordered. Blake turned on his heel, eyes wild, but realized he was trapped. Another officer emerged, hand on holster. "Hands where we can see them!" Blake raised his hands, though he still glared daggers at Nathan. "This is a mistake," he mumbled. "That guy is lying. I'm the manager here." But the employees, gathered at the store entrance, were all watching. They had seen too much to stay silent now. The final confrontation was loud, chaotic. Blake tried to spin a story, but the employees shouted him down, each telling their version of the truth. Nathan gave the officers his business card, explained who he was, and presented the photos he'd taken. The evidence was damning. Within moments, Blake was in handcuffs, sweat dripping from his brow. He shot Nathan one last furious glare. "You'll pay for this," he spat. But Nathan just stood firm. "No," he said softly. "You already did." With Blake restrained in handcuffs, the police guided him to the squad car. The swirling red and blue lights reflected against the store's glass windows, painting the scene in chaotic colors. Employees gathered in small clusters, whispering in hushed tones, trying to process what had just happened. Some wore expressions of disbelief, others relief. It was as though the oppressive spell that had hung over them for months had finally broken. Lisa stood off to the side, arms crossed over her chest, still trembling. Nathan approached her carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. She looked at him, tears of exhaustion mixed with a hint of gratitude in her eyes. I can't believe it," she murmured. "You're really the CEO?" Nathan nodded, a bit sheepish. "I had to see the problems firsthand. I never imagined they'd be this severe." She took a shaky breath, glancing at the rest of the staff. "Are we, all of us, are we safe now? Or will there be retaliation?" Nathan shook his head firmly. "No. I promise you, nobody here will face retaliation for speaking out. I'll make sure of it." He caught sight of the stock boy, the husky man named Marco, and Jenny all edging closer, drawn by the conversation. They looked to him with guarded hope. Lisa looked down, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up before. But he made everyone so afraid." Nathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You have nothing to apologize for. It's Blake who should be sorry. And he'll answer for every minute of stolen time, every dollar of stolen wages." She gave him a tremulous smile, relief visibly washing over her. Outside, the cops were reading Blake his rights, but he was still sputtering protestations of innocence. Nathan watched from the corner of his eye, arms folded. He could almost feel the entire staff exhale in unison. Their biggest tormentor was finally under the glaring spotlight of the law. No more hidden corners, no more intimidation. One of the officers approached Nathan. "Sir, we have enough to detain him. We'll need statements from you and any employees willing to testify." Nathan nodded. "Absolutely. Whatever you need." He motioned to the employees, many of whom nodded in agreement. The officer gave a curt nod and returned to the squad car. Watching it all, Nathan felt a wave of mixed emotions, satisfaction that justice was being served, guilt that he hadn't intervened sooner, and determination to make things right moving forward. The atmosphere in the store underwent a palpable shift. People stood a bit taller, voices carrying a note of relief. The oppressive tension that had weighed down every corner suddenly dissipated. Jenny approached, wringing her hands nervously. "Is it really over?" she whispered. Nathan nodded. "It's over. He won't be coming back." A wave of relief flashed across her face, followed by a tiny smile. Lisa mustered the courage to ask the question that seemed on everyone's mind. "What happens now? Are we all going to lose our jobs? With the theft and everything, I mean." Nathan shook his head emphatically. "No one's losing their job because of Blake's crimes. In fact, I plan to make sure each of you is compensated for any stolen wages. We'll do an audit of all the hours worked." He paused, glancing around at the startled but hopeful faces. "I owe you an apology for not catching this sooner. I had no idea things had gotten this bad." A murmur rippled through the employees. They looked at one another, then at Nathan with expressions of cautious optimism. Marco spoke up, voice gruff but earnest. "To be honest, we were starting to believe corporate didn't care. That maybe they were in on it." Nathan's eyes flashed with regret. "I'm sorry you felt that way. That's on me for not having better oversight. But I'm going to fix it." In the background, a second squad car arrived, and the officers spent time collecting statements from each employee who was willing. Nathan urged them all to speak honestly, ensuring them that they had his full support. Some of the employees seemed timid at first, but as the minutes passed and the gravity of the situation sank in, more voices joined the chorus against Blake's tyranny. Blake himself, once so arrogant, now sat cuffed in the back of a squad car, shoulders slumped. Nathan caught a glimpse of him through the window, eyes wild with helplessness. It struck Nathan how quickly a tyrant's demeanor could crumble once their power was stripped away. He felt no pity, only resolve to ensure the system wouldn't allow another Blake to arise. With statements wrapped up, the officers prepared to drive off, leaving the store in the quiet aftermath of the ordeal. Dawn lightened the sky, casting a pale glow through the glass doors. Nathan turned to the employees. "Anyone who wants to go home can go. You've been through enough for one night. But if you'd like to stay and talk, or help me figure out immediate steps to right this wrong, I'd appreciate your input." A few employees exchanged exhausted looks, but some nodded their agreement. Lisa hesitated, tears still glimmering. I need to get home to my kid," she admitted, voice cracking. Nathan gave her a warm smile. "Of course. Go home, get some rest. We'll talk again soon, I promise." She gave a quick nod, then gathered her things. Jenny and a couple of others followed suit, relief evident in their postures as they stepped outside, free at last from the oppression they'd endured all night. Marco stayed behind, arms folded, looking at Nathan with a mix of respect and curiosity. "So, you really had no idea what was going on?" Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Not to this extent. We suspected something was off, numbers didn't add up, and complaints had trickled in. But I wanted to see it for myself, unfiltered." Marco nodded, considering. "Well, I guess it worked. You sure made a big entrance." Nathan laughed softly, though the sound was tinged with exhaustion. "It wasn't the way I planned it, but yeah, I guess it worked." He looked around at the half-finished inventory, the battered shelves, and the scattered items from Blake's rampage. A mess, yes, but a hopeful mess. A place that could be put back together, better than before. "We'll get this store back on track," he promised. "And we'll do it without anyone like Blake in charge." Marco nodded, letting out a breath that sounded like the release of long-held tension. Outside, the squad cars disappeared into the dawn. Blake was gone. The store felt oddly silent without his bullying presence. Nathan turned to the employees who remained. "Thank you for sticking it out. Let's clean up a bit, then we can talk about next steps." Tired but relieved, they nodded. As they began picking up fallen merchandise and sorting it properly, Nathan felt a wave of gratitude for the resilience of these employees. They had been pushed to their limits, yet they still wanted to make things right. In that moment, the store felt like a different place entirely, a place where hope was possible, where fear no longer reigned. And as they worked, a sense of collective triumph took root, blossoming into the early morning light. Nathan helped the remaining employees tidy up the store, a small but significant gesture of solidarity. Though he was the CEO, he rolled up his sleeves just like any ordinary worker. Together, they gathered toppled merchandise, scanned the last inventory items, and returned the store to a semblance of order. Sunlight began spilling through the windows, chasing away the fluorescent glare. It felt like a fresh start. He could sense the employees studying him with a mix of curiosity and relief. The more cautious ones seemed unsure how to address him now that they knew his position. But he remained approachable, offering a hand here and there, asking how they were holding up. Gradually, the final echoes of fear dissipated. The hush that had once indicated dread now felt more like calm anticipation. When the last of the stray items was returned to its proper place, Nathan gathered the employees near the customer service counter. "I won't keep you too long," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the open space. "You've all been through a lot, and you deserve rest. But I also want you to know what's going to happen next." A few employees glanced at one another, bracing themselves for potential bad news. Nathan held up a reassuring hand. "First, no one here is losing their job over Blake's actions. If anything, you all deserve a raise for putting up with him." Nervous laughter rippled through the small group. Marco cracked a grin, and even Lisa, who'd briefly returned after checking on her child, let out a soft chuckle. Nathan continued, voice earnest. "We're going to do an immediate audit of hours to make sure everyone gets paid for every minute they worked. Any wages that were stolen or withheld will be reimbursed in full. It might take a little while to sort out, but we'll get it done as quickly as possible." He saw looks of relief wash over their faces, tensions slipping away. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth, tears glistening once more. He paused for a moment, meeting each gaze. "Second, I promise stricter oversight. No one like Blake will ever again hold a position of authority in this company, if I can help it. We'll institute a better monitoring system, one that still respects everyone's dignity, but also prevents corruption." The employees nodded, some hugging each other in relief. "And finally," Nathan said, voice softening, "I want to thank each and every one of you for sticking it out under terrible conditions. Your dedication kept this store running even when the leadership failed you." He gave a small, sincere bow of his head, a gesture of humility that made a few employees glance at each other in surprise and respect. Lisa stepped forward tentatively. I just wanted to say thank you," she murmured, looking at Nathan through red-rimmed eyes. "For not only believing us, but for coming here in person. Nobody else from corporate ever did that." Nathan felt a lump in his throat. "I wish I'd come sooner," he admitted, voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry it took so long." Marco cleared his throat. "Well, you're here now. And that means something." Another wave of nods traveled through the group. It was an unspoken consensus. Their ordeal had been painful, but the outcome offered a brighter future. The store felt renewed in spirit. The knowledge that Blake wouldn't be returning lifted the invisible shackles that had bound these employees for far too long. Nathan wrapped up the impromptu meeting by reminding them to clock out properly and get some much-needed rest. As they dispersed, many offered quiet words of thanks or shy smiles. The weight of fear was gone. In its place was cautious hope for better days ahead. Some employees even started making plans to celebrate, a trip to a nearby diner for breakfast, perhaps. Anything to mark the end of Blake's tyranny. Lisa lingered as the others filed out. She approached Nathan one last time, her posture relaxed yet emotionally raw. "I'm still a bit in shock," she confessed with a shaky laugh. "I never expected the CEO would show up wearing a name tag and pushing carts." Nathan chuckled softly. "Me either. But it was the only way to see the truth. You shouldn't have had to endure any of it." She reached out and squeezed his hand briefly, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you. Not just for fixing it, but for understanding what it's like for us." Nathan nodded, feeling an unspoken bond form. He had always cared about his employees in theory, but living alongside them, even briefly, had transformed his understanding. "We'll make it better," he promised, his voice firm. After she left, Nathan found himself alone in the store, the early morning light giving everything a soft glow. Discarded notes and half-finished inventory sheets still cluttered the counters, remnants of the chaotic night. He took a moment to reflect on the whirlwind of events. Blake's arrest felt like both a triumphant victory and a sobering reminder of how quickly a workplace can turn toxic under the wrong leadership. But the employees had weathered the storm, and now they had a chance to reclaim their dignity. Before leaving, Nathan walked the aisles one last time, imagining how the store would look with fresh management and renewed morale. He could already picture the improvements: reorganized shelves, accurate registers, staff who felt supported rather than oppressed. The thought brought a small smile to his face. A bright future indeed. At the exit, he paused, hand on the door. The morning sun spilled in, warm and inviting. It felt like stepping into a new chapter, not just for this store, but for the entire company. A sense of deep responsibility settled over him. He'd exposed one corrupt manager, but how many others might be out there? He resolved to conduct more undercover visits, to stay connected with the lifeblood of his business, its people. Because at the end of the day, success wasn't measured by profit margins alone, but by the well-being of those who made everything possible. He stepped outside, letting the door swing shut behind him. The air felt crisp, full of promise. He made one final mental note: to follow up with the employees personally, ensuring each and every one got justice. Then he pulled out his phone, dialing corporate's number. "It's done," he said simply when his contact picked up. "And we've got work to do. Let's make sure something like this never happens again." With that, he slipped his phone away and headed to his car, the rising sun at his back. As he drove off, the store receded in his rearview mirror, but the sense of resolve stayed with him. A new day had begun, and with it, the hope that no employee under his watch would ever live in fear again. Have you ever worked for a terrible boss? Share your story in the comments.